Hey everybody, this is Vaughn from Exact Remedy. Welcome to today's episode, and we're going to be talking about this article that came out about a month ago. And this was a very interesting article, very popular article. It's about depression. Depression is probably not caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. By the way, all the links to all these articles you're going to be able to find in the description at the bottom, but there's also an outline in the description. You can look it up. So let's begin. So this article comes out and essentially shows, or the research came out and it showed that the way we thought serotonin worked in the brain as related to depression doesn't work the way we think it did. Does that mean that serotonin reuptake inhibitors or SSRIs don't work? There's some controversy around that. And it seems that having low serotonin in these little receptors or the synapses seems to not be the issue that is related to depression, and that it might be more related to stress. Now, does stress lower the serotonin? Not sure. See, the problem is when you get deeper into the subject matter, you start to discover some interesting things. Now, we're going to get into that in a second. Now, if you're having some kind of suicidal ideations, you're having a very difficult time, you're deeply depressed, get help. Tell somebody. Okay, call 988 if you're in LA. There's help out here, but this number might be different in your area. So just go to Google, type in suicide hotline, and you'll be able to get some help that way. So with that said, let's dive into this. So I just want to show you something before we get into the actual study from the University College London. Scientists in Virginia at the Virginia Tech Carilion Research Institute have begun to unravel new serotonin acts based on data collected in a first-of-its-kind experiment that utilized electrochemical probes implanted into the brain of awake human beings. Now, I think a lot of people, what they don't understand is that the research and the technology is actually quite primitive to see what's going on inside the brain. We don't have probes. I mean, this is a study we got right here, but I don't think they're doing this across the board. These are new technologies, and it's invasive. So if it's invasive, it's going to create changes in the environment. The immune system is going to react. Stress hormones are going to react. The body's not going to behave the same way. Okay. Now, when you go to Dr. Amen's clinic, who's a psychiatrist, they use brain imaging and computer technology to model the brain and its activity in different states. Okay, we're going to come back to this article a little bit later on from his website. But this basically shows you that they're developing new technologies to get into and understand what's going on in the brain in more intrusive ways. I'm not a big fan of it, but because a lot of these models that a lot of the science is based on, they get these rats and they do these invasive studies on special rats that have certain type of receptors and other type of receptors, and it's just kind of like this Frankenstein type of scientific research, which some of that has to be done. I get it, but how valid is the information? And as time goes on, I think we're going to discover that more and more the science that we think is settled is not so settled. Okay, so let's look at how the serotonin and the synapses work. This guy has a great
SSRIs
video.
work by inhibiting a mechanism called reuptake. In reuptake, a protein called a transporter transports excess neurotransmitter molecules out of the synaptic cleft, usually back into the neuron that released them. SSRIs inhibit the reuptake of serotonin. By inhibiting the removal of serotonin from the synaptic cleft, this causes levels of serotonin in the synaptic cleft to rise. These increases in serotonin levels have been hypothesized to be the mechanism by which SSRIs can treat the symptoms of depression.
Now, you have to understand something. The body is an insanely complex system. You're talking about trillions and trillions of processes going on all the time. Okay, it's not just it's like like hundreds of trillions of processes simultaneously happening in the body at all times. So whenever you're having these effects, especially in the brain or in certain parts of the body that are kind of central, we're not talking about the skin, we're talking about like core regulatory systems. The downstream effects could be really devastating. I mean, let's look at some of the side effects from too much serotonin, okay, or maybe not too much serotonin. That's a whole different condition. But like the side effects from serotonin or taking SSRI medicines, feeling agitated, shaky, or anxious, diarrhea, and feeling or being sick, dizziness, blurred vision, loss of libido, difficulty achieving orgasm or sex. So it's messing with some kind of like sexual system of the body, man, difficulty obtaining and maintaining erection. So it's messing with some kind of testosterone or some kind of sexual system pathway in the brain or in the body somehow. And if you know anything about more esoteric sort of understandings about the body and sexuality, this is where the joy in life comes from. Kundalini yoga is based on that, and there's other methods and practices, right? So it's throwing something off metabolically and hormonally. So this is the actual, well, actually, this is the actual article, right? Yeah, this is the actual article, and it's a little, nerdy and heady and stuff like that. So let's just skip over here and actually look at the article that the college itself published as a sort of like a layman's look at the article so people can actually understand it.
The new Umbrella Review, an overview of existing meta-analyses and systematic reviews, published in Molecular Psychiatry, suggests that depression is not likely caused by a chemical imbalance, and calls into question what antidepressants do. Most antidepressants are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, which were originally said to work by correcting abnormally low serotonin levels. There is no other accepted pharmacological mechanism by which antidepressants affect the symptoms of depression.
So that's interesting. It said there is no other accepted pharmacological mechanism with which antidepressants affect the symptoms of depression or symptoms of depression. So this is a model that's biochemical. Okay, there are other models to deal with the body, acupuncture being one. Okay? Nutrition would be in this sort of pharmacological model, actually, because you're dealing with receptors and nutrition. It's very physical. Okay, but for example, circadian rhythms doesn't really fall into this, even though circadian rhythms, and circadian rhythms being just the timing of the day, night, and light, and all these other sort of natural patterns and rhythms in nature that we find. Whenever you fall into those patterns that are healthy, you get healthy and happy. So let's continue.
Depression. Lead author Professor Joanna Moncrief, a professor of psychiatry at UCL and a consultant psychiatrist at North East London NHS Foundation Trust, NELFT, said, "It is always difficult to prove a negative, but I think we can safely say that after a vast amount of research conducted over several decades, there is no convincing evidence that depression is caused by serotonin abnormalities, particularly by lower levels or reduced activity of serotonin." The popularity of the chemical imbalance theory of depression has coincided with a huge increase in the use of antidepressants. Prescriptions for antidepressants have risen dramatically since the 1990s, with 1 in 6 adults in England and 2% of teenagers now being prescribed an antidepressant in a given year. Many people take antidepressants.
By the way, there's also cases of people actually having a really bad effect. There's cases like this in courts. Okay, I don't want to get into the details of that, but that's something that isn't really well known because not promoted, but people actually have psychotic breaks from some of these medicines, so that's something to also consider.
Antidepressants because they have been led to believe their depression has a biochemical cause, but this new research suggests this belief is not grounded in evidence. The Umbrella Review aimed to capture all relevant studies that have been published in the most important fields of research on serotonin and depression. The studies included in the review involved tens of thousands of participants. Research that compared levels of serotonin and its breakdown products.
So that's very important to know that they use the breakdown products because they can't get in. See, the serotonin in the brain is one thing. Okay, you can't get in there with probes and different kind of what are you gonna like drill somebody's head to extract the fluids and whatnot? They don't do that in a living person. So it creates problems. So they have to look at the breakdown products. I think those magnetic field resonance pictures are probably, if that's what they're using, um, is probably a really good method to find out where the activities are. But even then, those aren't totally clear and obvious either on how the brain works. There's a lot of mystery to it, actually.
Products in the blood or brain fluids did not find a difference between people diagnosed with depression and healthy control. Comparison. Research that compared levels of serotonin and its breakdown products in the blood or brain fluids did not find a difference between people diagnosed with depression and healthy control. Comparison. Participants. Research on serotonin receptors and the serotonin transporter, the protein targeted by most antidepressants, found weak and inconsistent evidence suggestive of higher levels of serotonin activity in people with depression. However, the researchers say the findings are likely explained by the use of antidepressants among people diagnosed with depression, since such effects were not reliably ruled out. The authors also looked at studies where serotonin levels were artificially lowered in hundreds of people by depriving their diets of the amino acid required to make serotonin. These studies have been cited as demonstrating that a serotonin deficiency is linked to depression. A meta-analysis conducted in 2007 and a sample of recent studies found that lowering serotonin in this way did not produce depression in hundreds of healthy volunteers. However, there was very weak evidence in a small subgroup of people with a family history of depression, but this only involved 75 participants, and more recent evidence was inconclusive. Very large studies involving tens of thousands of patients looked at gene variation, including the gene for the serotonin transporter. They found no difference in these genes between people with depression and healthy controls. These studies also looked at the effects of stressful life events and found that these exerted a strong effect on people's risk of becoming depressed. The more stressful life events a person had experienced, the more likely they were to be depressed. A famous early study found a relationship between stressful events, the type of serotonin transporter gene a person had, and the chance of depression. But larger, more comprehensive studies suggest this was a false finding.
By the way, I think that there is a biochemical element to all sorts of conditions. It's just that in this particular study, is saying that maybe serotonin isn't it. And if you look at nature in general, right, these are very complex systems. To just have this as a nexus point is sort of foolish, right? That it's just this one thing. It's complex. It could be, 100 different sort of chemicals and hormones and neurotransmitters involved in these things. It's probably more of a metabolic thing. There's maybe certain type of genes involved, certain type of events involved. It's much more broader than just this one serotonin. That's what it seems like to me. And whenever we're later on, as we get into the video, we're going to talk about kind of more holistic, takes on all this.
These findings together led the authors to conclude that there is no support for the hypothesis that depression is caused by lowered serotonin activity or concentrations. The researchers say their findings are important as studies show that as many as 85 to 90% of the public believes that depression is caused by low serotonin or a chemical imbalance. A growing number of scientists and professional bodies are recognizing the chemical imbalance framing as an oversimplification. There is also evidence that believing that low mood is caused by a chemical imbalance leads people to have a pessimistic outlook on the likelihood of recovery and the possibility of managing moods without medical help. This is important because most people will meet criteria for anxiety or depression at some point in their lives. The authors also found evidence from a large meta-analysis that people who used antidepressants had lower levels of serotonin in their blood. They concluded that some evidence was consistent with the possibility that long-term antidepressant use reduces serotonin concentrations. The researchers say this may imply that the increase in serotonin that some antidepressants produce in the short term could lead to compensatory changes in the brain that produce the opposite effect in the long term. While the study did not review the efficacy of antidepressants, the authors encourage further research and advice into treatments that might focus instead on managing stressful or traumatic events in people's lives, such as with psychotherapy, alongside other practices such as exercise or mindfulness, or addressing underlying contributors such as poverty, stress, and loneliness.
So now it's talking about the more complex nature of what depression is. Now, I think there is legitimate cases where people have been poisoned by mercury through dental work, or aluminum through certain type of medications and shots, or other chemicals in the environment, right? Birth control pills, for example. These are some common SSRIs: Prozac, Celexa, Zoloft, Paxil, and Lexapro. I've heard of all of these. I've never used anything like this. I never needed to, thankfully. But these are some very common, SSRIs. Probably heard of them at some point. Now, there's all sorts of different type of depression. This article gets into types of depression. Let's look at some of these. Major depression. I'm not going to go through all of these. Okay? But there's a lack of energy, lack of interest, weight loss or weight gain, feeling worthless. This is the mental element. Guilty, thoughts of suicide, trouble concentrating, making decisions, anxious. Anxiousness is very interesting because anxiousness and sleep problems are very much connected to depression. That's a very interesting kind of a thing. Anxiousness is sort of like you have energy to do something, but something is blocking you. Something is creating a fear. So it's like a go stop at the same time. It's a very kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but it's a very distressing kind of a state because you want to go and live, you want to go do stuff, and you're not able to. You want to move, but you can't, right? It's almost like fight, flight, and it's like on at the same time, and you get into kind of almost like a freeze state, right? Melancholy, it's almost like one of those states where you like lovesick or homesick or something like that. Nothing too crazy, even though there might be some thoughts of suicide right here. Agitation, so that's kind of like a hyped up state. I guess I wouldn't necessarily consider that a depressive state, but the depression could be causing this kind of negative thoughts could be causing the state where you are annoying as just keep moving the side around. They cause someone to move around, but this is the one I think people are the most concerned. Actually, this one and the bipolar. Okay? Because bipolar can be very, very actually dangerous too, because it could create a psychotic state in somebody. The persistent depressive disorders. Let me see if I have changes in the appetite, sleeping too much or too little, lack of energy or fatigue, low self-esteem, trouble concentrating or making decisions, feeling hopeless. And there's more. This is the one that's going to be the most kind of problematic because things don't get better, just down all the time. And I see, when I actually meet people with depression, I could quickly see what's going on actually with them. A lot of it's lifestyle. If they're younger, a little bit older, there's probably toxicity and other kind of lifestyle issues. Young people can get poisoned as well from the environment. I actually take lithium to go to sleep, like 5 milligrams or micrograms, I forget. I think it's milligrams. And it actually works. It really is calming. If you take too much, you become kind of like zombied out, like if I take 10 milligrams. But the doses that they use in pharmacology or like in psychiatry, it's like in the hundreds of milligrams. So bipolar is interesting, and I know somebody that does have bipolar. And one of the problems with bipolar is when they don't sleep and they can't relax, they can go into kind of hallucinations and psychotic behavior. So it could become very dangerous. And whenever they crash, the person I know doesn't have those problems, but I've known of people that have had those like psychotic states. But the person I do know that has this problem, what they do is they can't sit still is really what it is. They do, and they're sort of emotionally blocked up. And so at some point they run out of energy and they have to settle down and they have to recharge. And that takes a week to 2 weeks. So it's like about a month of activity and then about a week or two of just knocking out. So it's very disruptive because they have a hard time creating things in their life. SADS is kind of an easy one because you're dealing with sunlight, right? Sunlight is the real issue. Circadian rhythms, chronobiology. Postpartum depression. I don't know much about that one, but I do know that it could be really, really devastating for some people. EMS related. Now, this is interesting because we're going to talk about it a little bit, because this has to do with the female hormones. And this could be really problematic because actually there's brain changes that happen when you do take birth control pills. Psychotic depression, hallucinations, delusions. This is the psychotic. So this is dangerous. Okay? Paranoia, delusions, hallucinations. This is going into almost like a schizophrenic kind of a state. So atypical is type of persistence down as typical. Depression is considered to be that describes the pattern. Depression can improve your mood. So increased appetite. It's like a kind of a on and off kind of a depression, it seems like. So like something good happens. So this is probably lifestyle related. By the way, one thing you have to understand, and we're going to get into this a little bit further on too, is depression is a symptom. It's not the cause. Okay? Depression is a symptom. You have to get to the cause, figure out what's going on. So when they ask people to look at their body, look at this one, it's a little bit better image. This is what people describe as experiencing when they're depressed. Look at it. It's very dark. It's lifeless. It has no warmth. And that should tell you something. Follow the light. Follow the warmth. Get sunlight. Get movement. Even if it's 5 minutes of walking outside. Okay? Get off your phone. Kind of funny. Hey, they're all holding hands. Go back to this one. This one's more scientific looking. Fatigue, depression, already connected. So we talked about this a second ago, that there is an element of fatigue most likely involved. There's like a lack of energy. It's like the battery is drained. And that could be many different reasons for that. Nowadays, young men and men in general are addicted to porn. That drains your body. Staying up late, that drains your body. Not moving your body enough, especially in the suburbs. Sitting in a car, that drains your body of energy. Insomnia and depression. So if you just look, there's tons and tons of articles. We're just going to look at it. Sleep, circadian rhythms. That's what this is basically telling us. Sleep is a very important part. Anxiety is a very important part, and depression is a key to all. So it's like they kind of go together. It seems like, not in every case, but most likely in all the cases. Okay. Now, at the Amen Clinic, you could look at this article yourself. We talked about this earlier. He classifies different type of depression. Okay, depression, right? There's just straight anxiety. Okay. Let's move this up. No, that's fine. Pure depression. Mixed anxiety and depression. Over-focused. So there's an obsessive kind of the mind is very much thinking about certain things. Okay. Temporal lobe. Temporal lobe is right over here. So if you don't know. Depression and anxiety. See, depression and anxiety go together really well. Cyclical. Unfocused. So they're spacing out on this one. They're not engaged in life. These other ones are sort of like engaged and having a hard time. This one's just checked out. In homeopathy, you would almost call it an opium state. There's remedies made from opium in homeopathy that help counteract that kind of checked out state. There's also another one called gelsemium, which is a kind of a checked out state. So these are videos by Dr. Amen. Links are in the description. Just check them out. They're really good. One of them gives you some medication alternatives. One of them gives you how to know if you're depressed, 7 key symptoms. So this lady had a great, again, links are in the description, way on the bottom. Correlations to depression, nutritional deficiencies, hypothyroid, some medication. So medication you're taking could be causing the depression. Gender. Okay. So issues around gender. Now, what's interesting about that is usually girls, once they hit puberty, they start exhibiting higher levels of anxiety, depression, and other negative emotions like low self-esteem, body dysmorphia. So if you are a younger girl, like going through puberty around that age, or know somebody, just know that they're most likely going through these things. And there's kind of, I don't know if there's something wrong with that. Maybe there is something wrong with that, but it seems to be very prevalent in our culture. It could just be a normal part of going through puberty for a girl, but it could also be something that is maybe abnormal. I don't know about that. Generic or genetic interactions with the environment, allergies, inflammation, toxins, brain injury. Brain injury seems to be a big one, according to Dr. Amen. Infections and gut microbiome. So these are some foods that cause. Here, let's pop this up into a better format here. These are some foods that cause inflammation in the body and could cause mood problems. I know, for example, with beer, my mood comes down. I get very depressed off beer, and I don't have to even drink much. Like maybe a quarter of a cup will do that to me. I used to have problems with other substances, but as I've healed, they've gone kind of disappeared. Sometimes what'll happen to me is I'll just get kind of knocked out, but my mood doesn't get disturbed. Soy sometimes has some problems for me too, like not soybeans, but the like soya sauces, like fermented sauces, and that has to do with like histamine and being hyperhistaminic and stuff like that. Depression is not all in your head, and so body-brain connection. Depression is life, body, lifestyle. Where is it? You could read this yourself. Forget why I put this in here now, but there was something I wanted to talk about. That's fine. You could read it yourself and check into it. But the gut microbiome depression. So you also have an issue with the microbiome, because if that's out of alignment, it's not in balance. So that's like the bacteria that's inside your gut. You actually have more bacteria in your body and around your body than you have actual cells. And so they're always producing these substances. And if you have a dysbiosis or dysregulation of that, you're going to have a problem. Now, I don't believe that you can really regulate the microbiome just by putting stuff in there. You could do it a little bit, but really it's more of an internal metabolic kind of byproduct. So if your metabolism is not working right, the microbiome is going to show up in the microbiome. Gut microbiome linked to depression in large health study. This is from Science. So the dangers of birth control, it's kind of hard to read, but may contribute to nutrition deficiency, may cause worsening candida, often causes moodiness, may increase cancer risk, and blood clots. So blood clots, maybe what it's doing is also thickening the blood. Maybe it's not exactly a blood clot, but it's thickening the blood, which causes a kind of a stagnation in the system. Now, if you look, there's a bunch of stuff on birth control, and it's kind of funny. The first article comes up. No link between hormonal birth control and depression. Next one, teens taking oral contraceptives may be at an increased risk of, and it says depression right here. Oral contraceptives reduce general well-being in healthy women. Studies find key brain regions smaller in birth control pill users, and it goes on and on. I have the link. You could do lots of research in this area, find out why birth control could be causing the problems that you're having actually. And sometimes younger girls are put on birth control pills to regulate their hormones, so that could be, problematic. Back to the birth control might cause worsening candida, blood clots, cancer risk, intestinal permeability. So that's a problem because this could make you sensitive to certain foods and could cause problems with your microbiome. This is already doing that with the candida. Problems with malnutrition. So women suffer from major depressive disorders. I think it's double the number of women suffer from major depressive disorders than men. Okay, and they're looking at nutrition, and yeah, there's certain nutrients that are needed by women that maybe they're malnourished around. You can check out this report yourself, or the study. We're going to get into the nutrition more hardcore in a second. So let's just look at food. Leafy greens, olive oil, berries. I think the seafood is a pretty good one, even though there might be some heavy metals, but there's also other minerals in the seafood that help you get rid of the heavy metals, the zincs, the seleniums, and other type of oils that you'll find, and microminerals in seafood. Nutrition. So this is by Gary Null. And these are some of the substances he recommends in this article, okay, to look into. Now, if you know muscle testing or a chiropractor, you can go to them and have them help you figure out what you would need. Obviously, alcohol. You shouldn't be drinking, but you know what? Wine is actually considered kind of a health food, actually, believe it or not. So if you get good wine, you shouldn't. And if you drink a normal amount of it, not to the point of trying to knock yourself out and black out. I don't know if wine could even black you out, but you know, some other therapeutics. You have Tai Chi, and then toxics, right? So you have artificial sweeteners, gluten, and caffeine. I like how this Green Med Info, it's got a lot of good information on at Green Med Info. So these are just, you know, articles that come up on Green Med Info regarding depression. And so let's look at some of these. So you have curcumin. So this is like the psychedelics. Now, if you're having real problems, you don't want to be just doing psychedelics without some kind of guidance. There's people that actually specialize in that, especially ayahuasca. But again, I think you gotta be very, very careful, because if you do it in the wrong situation, you can actually get more depressed, because it's gonna bring up stuff. You may not know how to deal with it. Saffron. Let's see, omega-3s. You got to be careful with omega-3s because a lot of them are rancid. But eat more fatty fish, catfish, salmon, seafood. Eat a lot of vegetables and vegetable juices, but stay away from the sugars. DHA, EPA. EPA is supposed to be really good for depression. I think I have some notes around that, actually. If I could find it. Yeah, EPA is better for depression. DHA is better for anxiety and memory. Rhodiola, so that's a kind of like a adaptogen. Lavender is really good for the anxiety. Actually was given that to my grandma who had sundowners, and that actually helped her take less medication. We still had to give her Seroquel, which is very, very powerful. And because she was basically psychotic before she passed away, and so the drugs would help. Rosemary's great. I love rosemary. Kava Kava is a hard one to figure out. It's sort of stimulating. It's sort of relaxing. I've taken a high dose of it, and you kind of get into almost like a fun, childlike state. But that's something you can't really sustain. You need to fix the problems of your life, not just like get high off stuff. SAMI, that's a methylation assisting supplement. I think it's a drug. It's considered a drug in Europe. Chamomile hasn't really done much. I've experimented. Lemon ball's kind of good. It has a really there's a tasty tea you can take. L-carnitine is really good. Now, let me tell you something. If you're a vegetarian, you're going to need more of these type of things. The fish oils, the tryptophans. You're just not getting the nutrition level you're going to need. The fatty vitamins. And now, some people, I think there are a handful of people that probably can just eat vegetarian and vegan. I'm not one of them, and I think most people aren't. So if you're on that type of diet and you're having depression, I would get off that right away. That's what I would do if that was me, okay? Can't tell you what to do. I'm not a doctor, but that's what I would do. Looking at the Blue Zones. The Blue Zones was a very interesting project sponsored by National Geographic. This guy goes around the world, finds communities where people are living past 100 years old. I'm a big fan of the work. And they really push a vegetarian kind of a diet on it, but a lot of places they're actually eating pork, okay? Like Okinawa, they eat a lot of pork. So I'm not crazy about pork, but the point is they eat animal foods. But the big lesson here is if you follow these, the parameters laid out within this lifestyle kind of regimen, natural movement, get a purpose, start relaxing in your life, eat till, don't eat till you're over full, eat a lot of plants, drink some wine at 5 o'clock. The point isn't to drink wine and knock out. The point is to relax with friends, okay? Relaxation rituals. You've been working all day. Now you need to figure out how you're going to relax. The right tribe, the right people, sense of belonging, putting the loved ones first. Okay, a lot of people are putting career first or themselves first. Again, same thing. This is a Venn diagram, and right in the middle, you have different societies doing a little bit different things, but family, no smoking, plant-based, consistent, moderate physical activity, social engagement, and legumes. Okay, eat your legumes. What is that? Lentils, I guess? Beans? I don't do so good on beans, but I do enjoy them. So this is interesting. A lot of drug problems that we could solve in our society, I think we could do with acupuncture therapy, group acupuncture. And there's studies in this. Now they say it's inconclusive or whatever, but whenever you take acupuncture, your anxiety goes down, your mood goes up. And if you're getting acupuncture 3 times a week, which could be very cheap to do for homeless people or people that are depressed, they could sign up. There could be some kind of program in the community. Because in a group, it's just putting, look, let me tell you something. There's really advanced techniques in acupuncture, but there's very simple techniques where if you just put a needle here, one here, and maybe one somewhere else, like you can in a very routine way without having to get too complex with acupuncture theory. You can even train people like in like a 1-week course on how to just needle a few spots, and they get $15 an hour to administer this as a tool in public health. Acupuncture on the stress-related drug relapse to seeking. Acupuncture on the stress-related drug relapse to seeking. So this is drug seeking behavior, right? Why? They're trying to feel better. Okay. Transcranial direct current stimulation. I'm not sure if this is the one where they put it straight into the brain. So this is like a surgical procedure possibly, but there's also ones where they just have it going through the brain. I'm not sure which one this is, but I was studying this years back. I would love to see some maybe comments on some of the therapies, like with acupuncture or diet and nutrition. The elimination diets, where you're getting rid of foods that make you feel better and lower the inflammation. I'd love to see some comments below talking about some of these things that you've tried that have worked or not worked. Okay, so, and then what is this here? Okay, so this is going to lead into what we're going to get into next, some of the books that come up. Now, this is William Walsh. He's analyzed over 30,000 30,000 patients with medical disorders, acquiring a unique unparalleled database, more than 3 million chemical assays during his clinical and research work. Okay, and he's actually analyzed serial killers, which is crazy. That is really, really crazy. So this is his book right here. Hang on. But before we get to the book, we're going to look at a homeopathic book. And homeopathic medicine actually has provings that, let's make sure that this is very clear. Let's just double check that real quick. Yeah. So they have these things where they give people poisons, and then from poisonings they get symptomologies. When you look at depression, mood problems, you start seeing certain metals, arsenic, silver, aurum, that's gold, cannabis can make you anxious. We're looking at anxiousness. Apathy, indifferent to everything, that's going to be more like depression. Despairing is like a deeper form of it. Digitalis, so this is a drug that they use as a heart medicine, so it could be related to that as well. Coffee, I'm sorry, I was thinking of depression. Anxiety, coffee, anxiety. Meterinum, so that's like a STD, okay? So if you've had a treated STD that's gonorrhea, there could be a possibility of the metabolism changing because of that, because it's not properly treated. Serotonin, let's leave that to the side for a second here. Silica, stannum, I think, no, that's stramonium. Sulfur, okay. Let's look at some form of depression here. See, again, silver, arsenic. There's arsenic. For example, they feed chickens arsenic. Most people don't know that. Actually, homeopathic table salt, like sodium chloride, is very powerful antidepressant. Lachesis is a snake venom that they use, and it's related to the heart and circulation. And when we think about being depressed, we think of the heart, really, right? Opium, talked about that earlier. What else we got here? Platinum. Platinum is related to the hormones of women. Look at this. So despair, hopelessness, discouraged, easy lack of confidence. Argentum, silver, arsenic, burrita carbonicum, calcium. Calcium's not toxic, but maybe when you have too much of it, that gets into the metabolism. Iodine is more like an anxiousness causing one. Lack of iodine could make you depressed. I know that because it makes your thyroid not work. There was mercury here somewhere. Let me see if I could find it. Here we go. Mercury, apathy. So, like that could be from dental fillings, that could be from other medications, that could be from the environment. So this shows you that there are certain substances that do cause depression. That's kind of like a biochemical poisoning. Now, let's look at this book. I highly recommend this book. It's interesting, very interesting book by William Walsh. We just looked at his bio. So according to this guy, he classifies depression into 4 biotypes: undermethylated, folate deficiency, copper overload, pyrrole disorder. So with undermethylation, you have reduced serotonin, dopamine; folate deficiency, elevated serotonin, dopamine; copper overload, elevated norepinephrine; pyrrole disorder, reduced serotonin and GABA. And so the serotonin stuff maybe is based on old research, and so you put that in the book. You'll start seeing that now, and maybe that research will change. We don't know. Science is sort of like that. It's always changing, and you have to kind of be open to that. I think the people that get into this whole the science is settled attitude, got to be very, very careful of those people. So under methylated, you got SAMI. It's a supplement you could take. Folate, choline, DMAE, and pantothenic acid must be avoided since they increase chromatin acetylation and SERT levels. Okay, so you got to be careful. So if you do muscle testing, you can pretty quickly figure out what to do. In addition, nutrients that enhance synthesis of serotonin are tryptophan, vitamin B6, 5-HTP, A, C, and E. Symptoms and traits. Good response to SSRI. So they do respond well to SSRIs. Adverse reaction to folic acid. You can just freeze this and read the rest of this yourself. Have high libido, calm demeanor, frequent headaches, non-compliance with therapies. You could just freeze this and read it. So folate deficiency. By the way, this other one that we just looked at is 38% of the individuals he found from his work. So talk to your doctor about SAMI. You can get that just right off Amazon. Folate deficiency, 20%. So folate deficiency, typical treatment formulations for low folate deficiency include folic acid or folinic acid. So that's the methylated form of it, I think. You got to look at there's methylated and unmethylated folic acids. Same thing with, actually almost all the Bs have a methylated and unmethylated form. You have to make the distinction because that could make a difference. B vitamins, niacinamide, choline, DMAE, manganese, that reduce dopamine synaptic activity. And so what are some of the traits? Improvement after folate therapy, adverse reactions to SSRI. So you took it, you didn't feel good from it, actually had a bad reaction. food and chemical sensitivity, dry eyes and mouth, low or high artistic ability and interest, nervous leg pacing, non-competitive in sports and games. It's like the typical artist type, right? You can just look it up and get into that a little bit more. Zinc, PLP, B6, which tends to increase GABA levels, augmenting nutrients, including vitamin C and E. I like taking GABA. GABA is very relaxing, helps me sleep. Hypercupric depression. Now, that I think means there's too much copper in the system. Copper overload. Now, I know one of the things that helps get rid of heavy metals is sauna and clearing up the infections in the body. Okay? And one of the infections could be yeast overload. So stop eating junk food, because your immune system is going to be dealing with the crap coming from your intestine and not be able to deal with the heavy metals inside your blood. Okay. The vast majority, 90% women. So women have a higher tendency to get into this copper state. According to advanced nutrition therapy for reducing copper levels including MT protein levels, using supplements like zinc, together with manganese, glutathione, vitamin B6, C and E. Now, if you're going to be managing nutrition, it's very difficult, because one thing makes one thing go up, and they're all related, okay? So if you increase too much vitamin C, other things go down, like calcium, for example. So muscle testing is really effective. If you want to learn more about really getting to understanding how to build deep and powerful foundation for your health, and get into a deep dive of how your body works, there's a link. The first link in the description is a link to my course. Go check it out. It's really powerful stuff, and you learn muscle testing in the process, which is really cool. Very cool. So you want to get that copper cleared out. And what's interesting about copper also is you need some copper to get rid of copper. Seafood has a lot of copper in it. Polyuric depression. This is 15%, and I think this actually causes some serious symptoms, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see if there's a toxic overload depression. As described, person with polyuric disorder suffer from a double deficiency of zinc and B6. So zinc and B6 are what help with this condition. You could read it yourself. Just kind of make it so that you can actually kind of freeze it and read it. Now, there's also toxic overload depression he talks about here. Now, this is where you're going to need to detox and really clean up your, the crap in your life, because it's in the infections, being exposed to stuff, the work, you need to rest, you need to sleep more, more homeopathy probably. You could maybe do intravenous therapies that help with detoxification. Look at this. Weakening of the blood-brain barrier, altered neurotransmitter levels, destruction or demyelinization of the myelin sheath, increased oxidative stress, destruction of glutathione, and other protective. And I think you might even be getting into these states because of possibly infections like Lyme, for example. Some people have them, they don't even know, and it's just causing all this chaos in their body. I wonder if Lyme is related to some forms of depression. And I do know that Lyme goes into the brain. They find it in Alzheimer's cases. Now, the final thing we're going to look at is the Chinese perspective. Okay. So this is a great book on patent medicines. And I'm going to just kind of freeze it so you could freeze it and read it. But essentially what it's talking about here is that there's stagnation in the liver. And that's what's causing some forms of depression. And they treat it a certain way. They actually really have two areas. It's either the liver that's causing the depression because of stagnation. We talked a little bit about that with birth control pills, how it stagnates the blood possibly, right? By thickening it and creating clots. And you also have Shen disturbance, okay? Disturbing of the Shen. So lots of different things could create that, but Shen is like sort of consciousness and emotions. And lots of things can do that. A hyperthyroid state, the manic depression, shock. Okay. So let's go to the liver stagnation. Liver stagnation refers to stagnation of the liver, qi and or blood. The liver in Chinese medicine has a function of moving and storing qi and blood. In its moving function, the liver smoothly distributes qi and blood to the tendons and muscles as well as along its channel pathways. Its function of storing blood, which happens during the night hours between 1 and 3 a.m., offers the opportunity to cleanse and detox the blood. So don't eat before you go to sleep, folks. The liver has a direct impact on the function of the stomach and spleen, the uterus, and the lymphatic system. Thereby can be involved in disorders of digestion, menstruation, fertility, pregnancy, as well as immunity and infection. The liver channel routes through the genital region, including the scrotum, testicles, vagina, and to the breast and on the lips, eyes, and head. So they're not just looking at the liver as an organ. They're looking at it as an organ, but also as a function. And it has all these kind of diverse functions, and the channels and pathways go everywhere. Stagnation in the liver occurs for a variety of reasons. Internalization of emotions, particularly anger and depression, can cause stagnation. Dietary excesses can slow liver's functioning, especially overeating of rich foods, including refined carbohydrates and fats. Internal heat can lead to stagnation, and this can come from excess fat intake or can naturally occur following ovulation. From a modern physiological point of view, infiltration of intestinal toxins or microbes, environmental poisons in the air, food, and water, and pharmacological drugs can overburden the liver and lead to stagnation. We talked a little bit about this already. Stagnation of qi can be differentiated from stagnation of blood. Stagnation of qi affects both organs and channels. Because the liver controlling relationship with the spleen, 5-phase, Wu Xing, liver qi stagnation can cause a deficiency of qi spleen function, leading to chronic digestion weakness. So the liver's having a problem, so it starts weakening the spleen. Okay? In Chinese medicine, spleen and stomach work together to digest and warm up the food and get it into the body. This can cause stagnation of stomach qi with symptoms of bloating, epigastric or abdominal distension, esophageal reflux or constriction, nausea, vomiting, and pain. Stagnation of qi in the liver channel commonly cause breast distension. When combined with cold in the channel, can lead to scrotal swelling, inguinal pain, or inguinal hernias. So once you have cold in the channel, that's like a hypofunction. That could be caused by many different things: toxicity, infections, hormonal problems, congenital problems, issues you've been born with. Liver qi stagnation easily transforms into liver blood stagnation. When the qi and blood do not move smoothly, muscles and tendons become tight or tense. This is the etiology behind premenstrual syndrome and is responsible for irritability and headache. If the liver cannot smoothly deliver blood to the uterus, dysmenorrhea, menstrual cramping, and uterine fibroids can develop, as well as menstrual irregularities. Blood stagnation is the basis of cirrhosis. Now, let me tell you something. So this is a model. This is their ideology. That doesn't mean they're always effective in treating everything, okay? Because what I noticed for me as a Chinese medicine, the moment you stop going to treatment, the symptoms start coming back pretty rapidly. So they can bring the system into balance, but you quickly go out of balance. Lifestyle management is probably where you're going to have the most gains. But it's really interesting because it gives you a nice layout of how these things come together. So this is a medicine that they recommend: linking, decoction, T-pill. And there's other variants of these. I'm just going to go through it and you can see yourself. There's a bunch of these. Now this is 7, but you want to kind of stop right there. liver stagnation. Let's see liver stagnation. Oh, so this is the liver stagnation stuff, okay? Right here. If that relates to you at all. So you could just read this yourself, starting from about here. Okay. I love this book. I love the way it's organized. I love the thin sheets. So there's page after, and there's a lot of remedies for liver stagnation here. Okay. So with that aside, disturbed Shen. Now, if you have disturbed Shen, you're gonna have, this is gonna be more serious, most likely. Okay. So I'm not gonna get too deep into this at all. I'm just gonna leave it here. You could read it yourself. But this is where I think the psychiatric medicines actually help a lot, and acupuncture can help as well too, and really support. Because when you have, you could see it when you see the whites of the eyes in somebody, that's considered the disturbed Shen. This is where people's minds are really disturbed, and they could also be very dangerous. So check this out yourself, and we're gonna just leave it there because you've already, almost an hour in now. Now, with all this covered, let me just kind of go through I have a kind of a breakdown here of some things I want to talk about. Now, a lot of people, they love psychiatric, like pharmaceuticals for dealing with depression. And some people are really against it. They're more into the natural approach. Now, years ago, I had a friend that had schizophrenia. Now, schizophrenia isn't depression, but I know he was depressed. And you know what? When he would stop taking his medicine, you know what happened? He would disappear for about a week. So the cops would catch him harassing some people, and he had to go to jail. So some of these drugs, I remember my grandma, she would be very psychotic, and you couldn't help her with the natural approaches. She was a very impossible person. So we gave her psychiatric medicines, and it worked for her. It actually helped the quality of her life. Okay, it's not a cure, but it's a great tool to manage, and it's an accessible tool because some people don't have the time, they don't have the mindset to go after and figure out all these different things with their food and the allergies and sensitivities to foods and stuff like that. I have, but that's me. Everybody's different. Now you can outsource that service by going to a doctor, going to a chiropractor, going to a psychiatrist. I mean, there's a field of psychiatry now called nutritional psychiatry. So there's science around these things now. Okay. I mean, like a recent situation with depression with a friend of mine was, let's go back to that first thing so we can have something kind of cool to look at. I'll just have me. So, I think I want to go with this one better. Okay, so recently a friend of mine was very, very depressed for a few months. Why? He was working too much. He was getting pushed past the level that he can handle. And so, till he changed his job, he was doing all these things to self-soothe himself, going to massage, binging on food and sugar, and just constantly thinking and worrying, And now he's doing much better. He got a job at a pace that he can handle. Everybody's different. Sometimes what you think you can handle, you cannot handle. Okay. I think the issue also with women and hormones is very interesting because I think women are sort of like a canary in the coal mine as far as hormones are concerned and the environments. They're most sensitive. Why? Because they make the babies. So that's very important. We talked about the vegan issue earlier. If you're vegan, you're probably malnourished, and if you're having depression, you're really setting yourself up for some really serious problems. because those fatty vitamins, they're not in the nutrition of vegan foods. Okay. Stagnation, movement, fasting, herbs. So some herbs that I really like to get you moving, get you activated: basil, rosemary, ginger, black tea, green tea, coffee. Get sun. Don't be inside all the time. When it's time to sleep, get away from your phone, get away from the tablets, the computer, and do some reading. Possibly have a relaxation ritual to get you back into a sleep, get you into a relaxed sleeping state. If you're too kind of like rested, because some people sleep too much and their system has gone to kind of like a tonic state, one of the great things you could do is, if you don't have blood pressure problems, do a cold plunge. Okay, very simple. Take a cold shower. Very important that you get on top of your circadian rhythms. Very important. You need to rest. Okay, you need rest. You need to take a break. Very, very important. If you don't get breaks, you don't get rest, you don't get to do things that, like, it's called recreation for a reason, because you're recreating yourself. Okay. Sometimes it's trauma based, your problems that's affecting you. So there's things like energy psychology, and there's also processing, different type of ways of feeling your emotions and dealing with anger. Okay. I process almost every single day because it helps me a lot. So it's part of a meditative practice. And I'm making a course on that, which I'll be presenting at some point. For me, one of the reasons that really caused a lot of depression in my life is I didn't have a vision for my life. You got to get a vision. You got to get a goal that turns you on, lights you up. Get beauty in your life. Get plants in your space. I mean, if you look behind me, there's some, plants. There's plants in my living space, in my office, right? And so you need to get out of the state of helplessness and into generativeness. So if you're feeling like you can't change anything in your life, clean your room, get your grooming in order, shit, shower, and shave. Real basic things. Master that. Then go to the next step. Okay. You can't do those things, you're gonna have a hard time. Now, something I didn't talk about because I couldn't find it. I looked for it. There was a documentary about kids years ago. They went all over the world and they talked to different kids. They went to Africa, America, New York, Los Angeles, Japan, Russia, wherever. Okay, Australia, South America, Central America, and almost all the kids were depressed that were in city environments. They found one boy. There might have been other kids, but this kid really stuck out. It was an African boy, and he was a cow herder, okay, a shepherd. And they asked him, and he looked good. I mean, he looked healthy. His skin looked good. His teeth looked good. He was very lean. He was very confident, like very mature. And they said, "Are you depressed or anxious?" He said, "No, I feel great. I have a job." He was out in nature all day. Was working hard, so he was, sleeping at a good time. He's probably eating good whole foods. He had a purpose. He was able to help the family out with the money he was making. And that gave him a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and a sense of pride. And he was actually the healthiest kid in that whole documentary, psychologically. Get a purpose. Very important. Even if you're toxic, right? Even if you've been poisoned, your purpose might be to detoxify. Okay? Social status is really important. Okay? Social status is really important because they found people that are lower in social status have higher levels of stress. Okay, and that will possibly lead into anxiety and depression and circadian dysregulation. Okay. And with that said, that wraps it up. Now, if you're interested in naturally figuring out how to heal, now the course isn't about, depression or anything like that. But we get into how to build your health from the foundation up so that you don't have lots of different downstream health problems. So you get to the root. There's a link below in the description of my course, Exact Remedy Master Course for Natural Healing. And if you're interested in anything like that, go check it out. And thank you for checking out this video. Be well, be happy, get a vision, and I'll see you soon.